The call came at 6:47 inches the morning. I know the exact time because I had just set my coffee mug down on the kitchen counter and glanced at the clock above the stove, the one my wife had picked out at an antique market in Vermont, the summer our son turned 12. I remember thinking, nobody calls at 6:47 inches the morning with good news. I almost didn't answer. The number wasn't saved in my phone. A 312 area code. Chicago. I lived in Chicago for 31 years, but I didn't recognize it. Something made me pick up anyway. Maybe instinct. Maybe God. I still don't know which. Is this Mr. Gerald Holt? The voice was male, professional, careful in the way people get when they're about to say something they've rehearsed. I said, yes, this is Gerald. Sir, my name is Dennis Farrow. I'm the overnight security supervisor at the Meridian Tower on Michigan Avenue. I apologize for calling at this hour. I debated whether to make this call at all, and I want you to know I'm making it because I would want someone to make it for me. I didn't say anything. I picked my coffee back up. Last night, around 11:15, I reviewed footage from our parking structure, level 4. We had a motion alert on a vehicle that had been there for over 6 hours. Standard protocol. When I pulled the footage, I recognized the car because we have a monthly permit registered to your firm, Holt & Brecker Architecture. The vehicle is a silver Lexus, license plate November Foxtrot 338. My wife drove a silver Lexus, had driven it for 4 years. Sir, when the car arrived at 5:40 p.m., there was a passenger, a man. They arrived together, took the elevator from level 4, and they did not return to the vehicle until after midnight. The elevator log shows they accessed the 32nd floor. Your firm leases the 32nd and 33rd floors. I set my coffee down again. This time I didn't pick it up. I'm telling you this because the man on that footage, I've seen him in your building before, many times. I believe he works with you. I won't say more than that. I just thought you should know. I'm sorry, Mr. Holt. The line went quiet. I said, thank you, Dennis. And I hung up. I stood in my kitchen for a long time. The coffee went cold. Outside the window, the city was just starting to wake up, that gray, early light coming across the lake, and I watched it like I was watching something happen to someone else. 31 years. My wife and I had been married for 31 years. I had proposed to her in a parking garage, actually a terrible romantic gesture that she had laughed about for 3 decades. We had 2 kids, a son named Patrick who lived in Denver with his family, a daughter named Claire who was finishing her residency in Boston. We had a house in Lincoln Park with a kitchen my wife had designed herself. We had a dog named Chester who was currently asleep at my feet, unaware that something in the room had shifted permanently. The 32nd floor, my firm. There were 4 architects at Holt & Brecker, 3 junior associates, and Marcus Brecker, my business partner of 22 years, my best friend of 26, the man who had been the best man at my wedding, the man who gave a toast at my 60th birthday party last April and said, and I remember his exact words, Gerald Holt is the most honest man I have ever known, and I am a better person for standing next to him. I did not call my wife. I did not call Marcus. I got dressed. I drove to the office. I sat at my desk and I thought about what Dennis Farrow had said with extreme care, turning each word over like a stone, looking at what was underneath. Then I called my attorney. Her name is Patricia Osei, and she has been my personal attorney for 14 years. I told her what Dennis had told me, and I told her I needed to move carefully, and I needed to move quietly. She told me to document everything before I said a word to anyone. She told me to get a forensic accountant I trusted. She told me not to confront anyone, not my wife, not Marcus, until we knew the shape of what we were dealing with. She said, Gerald, when people feel cornered, they do unpredictable things. Don't let them know the net is coming. I wrote that down. I kept that piece of paper on my desk for the next 3 weeks. My wife's name is Renata. We met when I was 34 and she was 31 at an architecture firm where she worked in project management. She had dark hair and an extremely direct way of looking at people, like she was measuring something behind your eyes. I fell in love with her in a conference room during a budget review, which tells you something about me and something about her. She left that firm 2 years after we married. She raised our children, managed our household, built the life that let me build the company. I respected her completely. I was grateful to her daily. And I had never, in 31 years, suspected her of anything. That is the part that stayed with me in the dark, in the weeks that followed. Not the anger. The anger came later, enormous and slow like a tide. What stayed with me first was the vertigo, the sensation of standing in a room you have lived in for 3 decades, and suddenly understanding that the walls are made of something entirely different than you thought. I had a routine that week. I went to work. I came home. I ate dinner with my wife and I talked about ordinary things. Chester's vet appointment, Patrick's new job offer, a kitchen renovation we had been loosely planning. I watched her face while she talked and I looked for something I had missed. I didn't find it. She looked exactly as she always looked. That was its own kind of answer. Marcus and I had lunch on Wednesday of that week, the way we did every Wednesday, at a Thai place 2 blocks from the office. He ordered the same thing he always ordered. He talked about a residential project in Evanston we were pitching, about his daughter's soccer tournament, about a documentary he'd watched over the weekend. He laughed at his own jokes the way he always did. I laughed too, because I had decided to give nothing away, and because I needed to see how naturally he could sit across from me and be exactly that ordinary. He was very good at it. I noted that. My forensic accountant, a quiet, methodical man named Ray Sutter, who I had used twice before on partnership audits, began pulling records, business accounts, shared firm accounts, the operating budget. What he found over the following 10 days was not dramatic in the way of a movie. Solo was small and it was careful and it was patient, which made it worse. Small transfers. Vendor payments to a company called Lakefront Design Consulting that I had never heard of and had never approved. Project invoices for work that didn't exist. Over 18 months, approximately $340,000 had moved out of Holt and Brecker and into that shell company. Ray traced Lakefront Design Consulting to a registered agent in Delaware. He traced the registered agent to a personal account. He told me the personal account belonged to a woman named Sandra Brecker, Marcus's wife. I sat with Ray in his office on a Thursday evening, and I looked at the documents he had assembled, and I felt something crystallize in my chest. This had not been an accident. This had not been passion or weakness or a mistake that got out of hand. This had been a plan, a careful, patient, long-running plan to hollow out what I had spent 30 years building. And my wife, who had sat across from me at dinner 7 nights ago and talked about kitchen tile, had been in that office with him at 11 o'clock at night. I did not know yet what her role was. I did not know if she knew about the money. But I knew she was in it. Whatever it was, she was in it. I told Ray to document everything in a format that would hold up in court. He said he already was. I asked Patricia to file an emergency injunction, freezing all business accounts shared with Marcus, pending a partnership audit. She said she was ready to move the moment I gave the word. I said, "Not yet. Give me 1 more week." I needed to know about my wife. Patricia referred me to a private investigator named Carl, who came recommended and who said very little and charged a great deal and was, I understood immediately, exactly the kind of person you needed for exactly this situation. I gave him the relevant information. He told me he would have something for me within a week. He had something for me in 4 days. The report was thorough. 48 pages. Photographs, timestamps, location data pulled from a source I didn't ask about. Renata and Marcus had been meeting, the report indicated, at least twice a week, for approximately 14 months. Sometimes at the office, always late. Sometimes at a hotel near O'Hare. Once at a property in Wilmette, a property, Carl noted at the bottom of page 12 that was currently listed for sale and had been listed by a real estate attorney who also represented Lakefront Design Consulting. I turned to that page 3 times. I sat with it. And then I found the part that moved me from grief into something colder and more purposeful than grief. On page 31, Carl had included documentation of a conversation he had intercepted through legal means I will not detail here. The conversation was between my wife and Marcus. It had taken place approximately 6 weeks prior. In it, Marcus said that the Wilmette property closes in March and that Gerald won't see it coming because Gerald trusts everyone. And my wife said her voice. My wife of 31 years, she said, "He trusts me. That's the whole point. He trusts me. That's the whole point. I read that sentence in my car, parked outside Ray's office building, and I sat with it for a very long time. Chester was at home, Patrick was in Denver, Claire was in Boston, and I was sitting in a car reading a sentence that my wife had said about me like I was a mechanism to be used. I put the report in my briefcase. I drove home. I made dinner. That was the last night I did not know what I was going to do. By morning I knew exactly. I called Patricia first. I told her to proceed with the emergency injunction on the business accounts. She filed it within the hour, freezing all operational accounts shared with Marcus and triggering a mandatory partnership audit under the terms of our original founding agreement, which Marcus and I had both signed in 1999. The audit clause was something our attorney at the time had insisted on, and which Marcus had complained was unnecessary and overly formal. I had agreed to include it anyway. I was thinking about that, about the 26-year-old version of Marcus, complaining about audit clauses, when Patricia called me back to confirm the injunction had been granted. I called Ray next and asked him to prepare a formal summary document for the DA's office. He said it would be ready by end of day. Then I called my son Patrick in Denver. He is 34 years old, and he is a calmer person than I am by nature, which has always surprised me because he grew up watching me under considerable pressure, and I was not always calm. I told him what was happening. I told him everything. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "Dad, are you okay?" And I said I didn't know yet. He said he would be on a plane by evening. I told him he didn't have to do that. He said, "I know I don't have to." He was at my door by 9 that night. I did not call Claire right away. She was 3 weeks from her board exams, and I decided the information could wait 72 hours. I was wrong about this. As it turned out, she called me 2 days later because Patrick had told her, because that is what siblings do, and she was furious at me for trying to protect her, and she was right to be furious. I filed that lesson away. I also did not call Marcus. I let the injunction speak instead. His attorney called Patricia at 11:15 that morning, 15 minutes after the accounts were frozen. His attorney used words like misunderstanding and improper filing and damaging to an ongoing business relationship. Patricia used words like forensic accounting and shell company and criminal referral. And the conversation ended shortly thereafter. Marcus called my cell phone 4 times between 11 and noon. I did not answer. He showed up at my office at 1:30. I had anticipated this, and I had left the office at 1. My assistant told him I was unavailable and handed him a copy of the formal audit notice prepared by Patricia's firm. He stood in my lobby, I was told later, for about 2 minutes without speaking. Then he left. I was at a coffee shop 3 blocks away, sitting with Patrick, when my assistant texted me that Marcus had gone. Patrick had a yellow legal pad, and we were writing things down in the order we needed to do them, the way my father taught me to solve problems when I was a boy. Make the list. Work the list. Don't look at the whole thing at once. It was the first time in weeks I had felt like myself. That evening I sat down with my wife. I had thought carefully about this conversation. I had decided I would not raise my voice. I had decided I would not make accusations I could not prove. I had decided I would tell her what I knew, and then I would listen, because 31 years had earned her at least the chance to say something, even if what she said was nothing, even if what she said was more of the same careful lying. I sat down across from her at the kitchen table, the kitchen she had designed, in the house we had lived in for 23 years, and I put Carl's report on the table between us. She looked at it. She looked at me. She didn't say anything for a long time. I let the quiet be there. Then she said, "How long have you known?" I said, "Long enough." She said, "Gerald, it's not what—" I said, "Don't." I said it quietly. I said, "I've read the transcript from October, Renata. I know what you said. I know what you both said. So please don't tell me it's not what I think." She put her hands flat on the table, and she looked at them. She was 62 years old. She was still the person who had laughed about my parking garage proposal for 3 decades. Both of those things were true at the same time, and I held both of them because I did not want to pretend that 31 years was nothing. It was not nothing. It was also not enough to excuse what she had done. She said, "I didn't know about the money. At first." I said, "And then?" She didn't answer. I said, "The Wilmette property. Were you planning to leave?" She said, "Marcus thought." I said, "I'm asking what you thought." A long pause. Chester came into the kitchen and put his head on my knee, and I put my hand on his head. She said, "I didn't know how to stop." I said, "That's not an answer." She said, "I know." I asked her to move to the guest room that night. She went without argument. I sat at the kitchen table for another hour with Chester, and then I went upstairs, and I did not sleep much. And in the morning, Patrick made coffee and scrambled eggs, and we sat at the counter. And he told me about a hiking trail in Colorado that I had to see, talking about it very specifically, the elevation and the views, and the best time of year to go. And I understood what he was doing, and I let him do it, because it helped. The following weeks moved quickly once they began. The Cook County DA's office received Ray's report and opened a formal investigation. The charges ultimately brought against Marcus included wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and misappropriation of partnership funds. His attorney negotiated, as attorneys do. What Marcus did not anticipate, what I had quietly anticipated from the beginning, was that, in addition to the criminal referral, Patricia had filed a civil suit for dissolution of the partnership and recovery of assets. Lakefront Design Consulting was traced, court-ordered, and unwound. The funds that could be recovered were recovered. Not all of them, but enough. The Wilmette property, which had been in contract under Sandra Brecker's name, was flagged during the civil discovery process. The sale fell through. Marcus lost the deposit. I sat in Patricia's office when she told me that detail, and I did not feel satisfaction exactly. It was more like the feeling of a door closing, not triumphant, just final. My wife retained her own attorney, and we began the process of divorce. 31 years of shared life takes time to untangle, and I will not pretend the process was clean or painless. There were hard conversations about the house, about finances, about what we were going to tell people. Patrick and Claire were present for some of those conversations and absent for others, in the way that adult children must sometimes be both witness and bystander to their parents' failures. Claire called me one Sunday and cried on the phone, and I did not tell her not to cry. I just listened. She needed to grieve something. So did I. What I will say is this: I did not fall apart. I had thought, in those first days after Dennis Farrow's call, that this might destroy me, that a man of 63 does not easily rebuild from a foundation that turned out to be hollow in places he never checked. I thought the anger might consume me, or the grief might quiet me into something I didn't recognize. Neither happened. What happened instead was something I didn't have a word for at first, a kind of clarification, like a lens being adjusted after years of slight blurriness that you had just accepted as normal. I kept working. I restructured the firm smaller, with 2 junior architects I trusted, focusing on the kind of residential and civic projects I had cared about before the business had grown in directions Marcus had pushed. I brought on a new partner 18 months later, a woman named Judith, who had been an associate at a competing firm, and who had a reputation for being exact and ethical and occasionally difficult. I liked all 3 of those qualities very much. I sold the Lincoln Park house. I bought a smaller place in Andersonville, close to the lake, with a back room I turned into a drafting space. Patrick came to visit in June, and we put together the bookshelves in that room, and he said, "Dad, this is actually a really good apartment," with the particular surprise of someone who had been worried, and I told him I knew. Claire came in August. We cooked dinner together, and she told me about her residency, and I told her about a project I was working on, a community center in Pilsen, and we talked until almost midnight, which is something we had not done since she was in college. Chester turned 11 that fall and slowed down considerably, which I took as permission to slow down myself on our evening walks, to go at his pace instead of mine, stopping when he wanted to stop, sitting sometimes on a bench by the lake while he investigated whatever required investigating at the base of a tree. I started noticing things I had not noticed in years, the way the light came off the water in October, the particular cold of a Chicago November that you cannot actually describe to someone who hasn't stood in it. The criminal case against Marcus concluded 14 months after the initial filing. He did not go to trial. His attorney negotiated a plea arrangement, restitution, probation, the permanent revocation of his architectural license. He could no longer practice architecture. Everything he had spent 30 years building under my name and alongside mine gone, not by my hand, by his own. I was not in the courtroom. I had chosen not to be. Patricia had offered to arrange a victim impact statement, and I had considered it and ultimately declined. What I wanted to say to Marcus I had already said in documents, in filings, in the civil suit that had returned $280,000 to the firm. I did not need to stand in front of him and say it aloud. Some things are communicated more permanently in writing. I had learned that at architecture school, and apparently it was still true. I heard from Dennis Farrow once more, about 8 months after that first call. He had found my firm's address and sent a handwritten note on plain white paper. It said that he had followed the news and was glad things had worked out, and that he hoped he had done the right thing by calling me. He said he had gone back and forth about it for a long time before he picked up the phone. I wrote him back. I told him he had done the right thing. I told him that sometimes the right thing is also the hard thing, and the fact that it was hard to do did not make it less right. I thanked him for being the kind of man who calls. I don't know if he wrote back. I like to think he did. What I know is this. I am 64 years old. I have a good apartment near the lake. I have a firm I'm proud of, and a project in Pilsen that is going to be something real, something that lasts. I have a son who flew to Chicago in 4 hours because I needed him, and a daughter who stayed on the phone with me while she cried and called me the next day to apologize for crying, which she never needed to do. I have a dog who walks slowly now, and who still, on good mornings, runs toward the water with the energy of something half his age, as if he remembers who he used to be and finds it still available to him. I lost things. I will not pretend otherwise. 31 years of a marriage, a partnership of 22 years, a version of my life that I had believed in completely. Those are not small losses. I am not the kind of man who wraps grief in a bow and calls it a lesson. But I am also not the man Marcus counted on me being. He counted on my trust. He counted on my loyalty, used it as a door to walk through, thought it would keep me from looking too closely at what was on the other side. He was wrong about what trust means. I trusted him, and I was wrong to trust him. Those are different sentences. The first one is about me. The second one is about him. I know which one matters. Dennis Farrow made a phone call at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning because he thought I deserved to know the truth about my own life. A man I had never met. He had no obligation to me. He had every reason not to get involved. He called anyway, because he is the kind of man who calls. I think about that sometimes, on the walks by the lake, when Chester stops and I stop with him and we both look at the water. I think about the kind of people who tell you the truth when they don't have to. I think about how rare that is and how much it changes. I think about the list Patrick and I made on that yellow legal pad in the coffee shop on Michigan Avenue. Make the list, work the list, don't look at the whole thing at once, and how we worked it, item by item, until it was done. The drawer where I used to keep that legal pad is empty now. I don't need it anymore. The case is built. The walls are painted. The light, in the morning, comes through the windows of my good small apartment and lands on the drafting table in the back room, and I sit down, and I work, and it is enough. It is, in fact, considerably more than enough.